And coming up on this week's show, new Eurostar challenger Gemini Trains gives us an exclusive interview. Then we preview an upcoming interview with Northern Powerhouse Partnerships' Henri Murison, in which he does not hold back. Welcome to Green Signals, then, from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
Well, let's dive straight in. Lots to talk about. A couple of weeks ago, we covered the rapidly developing story of the emergence of competitors, not before time, for Eurostar on the cross-channel services between London, Paris, Brussels, and who knows where beyond. Up until now, all the potential new entrants have been very tight-lipped in public, and perhaps understandably so. Which is why we are especially delighted to say we've an exclusive interview for you today. The chief executive of one of the prospective operators, Gemini Trains, agreed to speak with us, and it's most revealing. Adrian Quine talks openly with Richard about all aspects of the challenges facing aspiring operators on the route and where Gemini Trains has got to with its plans. So if you've wondered what's really going on with new cross-channel services, here is the definitive story.
Well, welcome to Green Signals, Adrian. Thanks for joining us. I just wonder, just for the benefit of those who perhaps aren't really aware, Gemini Trains, I suppose who, when, why, what's your vision? Why are you different?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me and great to see you. Where are we different? I suppose we're different in the sense that we are trying to create something that goes back to basic first principles here. So often in the UK rail industry, and I think this is sort of common across the whole of Europe, you've ended up with a sort of fairly vanilla one-size-fits-all, usually a nationalised railway company with little competition, and you can't blame them. It's just the way it's always been. So I think if you look at a lot of other industries where you've had, I'm going to use the word disruptor or innovator or a challenger, what you've tended to see is that there's a sort of a reversal, there's a look back at first principles. And from there, you can look at actually what is it that the passenger wants? What is it that we can do differently that hasn't been done in the past? And I think that's the key thing here. It's looking at, a route, clearly one of the most sort of premium routes in Europe, London, Paris, London, Brussels. You've had one operator on the route for a long time, and you've got very, very high fares. And, I think rail has a huge opportunity to get a greater share of that market. People still fly from London to Paris, which in my view is utterly bonkers.
It's weird though, isn't it, Adrian, that we've had a service, a Eurostar service from London to Paris and Brussels for 30 years. We've had a high-speed line for 20 years. I wonder why it's taken this long to get to this point.
Well, I think there's various reasons. I think the main reason is that the regulatory hurdles have been too great. And there's two main points to that. One is that the Channel Tunnel had extremely stringent fire safety regulations, which required the use of 400-metre long trains. The idea was that if the train came to an emergency stop anywhere in the tunnel, at least one door was adjacent to the emergency exit to the service tunnel. So that was one of the big issues, because 400-metre trains are not generic. They're very specialised, and they can only go to stations where you have the infrastructure that can cope with them.
And that was the Channel Tunnel Safety Authority, wasn't it? So have they relaxed or changed that stipulation now?
They have certainly implied that that there is a route that you can go down where you can have a 200-metre long train. The other problem was, of course, we've only recently seen the sort of opening up of European railways to competition, and this is off the back of an EU directive. Whereas before, it's fair to say the nationalised companies in France, SNCF obviously being the main one on the Channel Tunnel route, would not have welcomed competition. We've now noticed a big change. SNCF actually couldn't have been more welcoming. We've spoken at length to SNCF Réseau, the infrastructure manager, to Garan Connections, who run the stations, less so to Voyage, who run the trains. But I think those two things have really opened up the possibility of competition.
So it's you just mentioned a number of organisations there. I mean, that's one of the challenges here, isn't it? There's so many bits involved. You've got GetLink, Tunnel, the Safety Authority. You've got High Speed One. Obviously some Pancras High Speed. You've got Network Rail, and that's just on the UK side. You've got it all sort of replicates elsewhere. So today, is it possible in literally a minute to say, right, this is where we are, this is who's kind of pro this, and this is who we've still got to convince of all these people?
Well, I think certainly the infrastructure managers are very pro it. I mean, HS1, St Pancras High Speed, Getlink and SNCF Rezo earn their money quite simply from having trains running along their tracks. So they are incentivized as an infrastructure manager to get more trains on the tracks. And bear in mind that, in the case of the Channel Tunnel, there is capacity available. And then the choice of St Pancras High Speed, formerly HS1, they're running at 50% capacity. So there's loads of spare capacity. So they are very welcoming and extremely keen to see this happen.
Now, one of the capacity issues has been at St Pancras Station itself, hasn't it? Its ability to basically sort of handle X passengers per hour. But I think I'm right that St Pancras High Speed have announced that they're going to do something profound and transformative about that. When will that be in place, do you think?
I think that's going to happen in the next few years, the next couple of years. It's the exact timescale we're going to have to ask St Pancras High Speed about. But it's very interesting. When Robert Sinclair, the CEO of St Pancras High Speed, came across recently from London City Airport, which is arguably the nicest airport in the southeast in terms of efficiency and sort of passenger throughput and the passenger experience. He looked at St Pancras and thought, why is it taking so long to get people through? Why are we funneling people into this small departure area, holding them, kettling them, if you like, before allowing them onto the train at the last minute? It makes no sense. So he's, if you like, had a complete root and branch look at St Pancras and realised that actually, with a little bit of tinkering and the opening up of the arrivals hall for departures, because you don't need a massive great arrivals hall,
right.
All the immigration is now done at the other side of the channel. So when you arrive at St Pancras, you're already pre-cleared. Also, with the new European border agency procedures that are coming in the next couple of years, we're going to see speeded up border controls. No longer a British passport holder is going to have their passport stamped. So that's going to help. So, they've done a report on this, and they believe that the passenger numbers can go up from 1,800 to 5,000 an hour, which is a hell of a jump. The other part of your question relates really to the track capacity or the platform capacity. I think it's fair to say that Eurostar probably haven't had to make best use of the platforms, the most efficient use of the platforms, because they've had them effectively to themselves. So, a train can come in and it can sit there for ages before leaving. And actually, every time I go to St Pancras or look it up, I find that there's spare platform capacity anyway. You can see a station that really has potential.
I mean, one of the places where there's possibly not enough space is in a depot in North London, East London, which has become incredibly famous, really, Temple Mills. It's important because it's a UIC, i.e. it's a European standard gauge. It can take European trains. Eurostar say it's full. Challenger operators said, no, it's not. The ORR have had a look. It suggests that it might not be, but it was kind of far from absolutely clear to me. How important to all of this is Temple Mills? And if it doesn't fully work, are there alternatives?
It is very important because, as you quite correctly stated, it is the only UIC depot in the southeast. There's no point looking at, Fern Park or Wembley because you can't get there. So it is important in that sense. In terms of is it full or not, well, I think that's open to interpretation. I think it was interesting. The ORR quite rightly got an independent report done, and the IPEX report suggested that there is space there. Not enough space for everybody's aspirations, but certainly enough space if Eurostar were to make more efficient use of it. For example, the stored old Eurostar trains sitting there doing nothing. So you could argue that if there's more efficient use, then there certainly is space. And that's been independently verified. It's interesting because we, plus the two other challenger operators, have all put in our requests. It's very interesting that we're the only ones that actually can work with the depot capacity that has been identified through the report. The others are asking for more. We've asked for a single 400-metre shed road, so in other words, maintenance shed, because we're running 200-metre trains, so you can get two in there. You can couple them together and take two in. and we're asking for 2 storage roads outside. So that is within the bounds of the report that has been published. I mean, there are other options we've looked at. They're less attractive, more complicated, more costly, but there are potentially other options out there. But Temple Mills, I think, is pretty critical.
One thing that's fairly clear is that there isn't, as you said, there isn't capacity for absolutely everybody with their aspirations. So does the ORR, in your view, end up having to have a process whereby it chooses who to direct Eurostar to give access to? And if so, is there a process laid down for that?
Well, this, of course, is the big unknown. Ultimately, this should be a commercial decision. But I suspect if you reach an impasse, and the ORR will need to opine. But at the moment, I think the ORR would probably prefer it if it was a straight commercial decision. And it might be that 1 or 2 operators drop out. Who knows? We're certainly going full steam ahead, and we're pretty close to our train order. But others might not take the view that there's room for 2 separate operators alongside Eurostar. It's amazing how much you can get out of a depot or out of a track network, out of a network, if you really adopt a glass half full, come on, pragmatic, we need to find a solution to this attitude.
One of your challengers, one of your competitors, said, hurrah! This is now the last hurdle. Everything's now sorted. Not quite sure that everything's quite sorted, is it yet? There's a bit more to do other than just Temple Mills.
Slightly premature, I'd say. But I mean, I don't want to be seen to be criticising our competition. I mean, I think I know we all know who you're talking about. You're talking about Virgin. I have huge respect for Virgin. Virgin are a very dynamic operator. They've done amazing things in aviation. I think Virgin Trains was fantastic when it took over the West Coast Main Line. They do have a habit of being rather exuberant, shall we say, in the early days. So I think that was maybe a little bit of wishful thinking, or maybe it was an opportunity to get some good publicity. But no, I think there are still more challenges to face, and I'm sure Virgin are only too aware of that.
But I suppose one thing that took us all by a bit of surprise, you may say, no, we knew this was coming, was the fact that Italian State Rails FS, who do run they've got their fantastic, there's that Frecciarossa service, isn't it, which runs in Italy. My understanding, they've signed an MOU with Evelyn. So that sounds a pretty serious competitor. Virgin are pretty serious. You're pretty serious. So this is hotting up nicely. Was the Italians a sort of a surprise?
Slight surprise, not entirely. I mean, bear in mind, as you stated just now, it's an MOU that's been signed. It isn't. It isn't. They haven't signed for the rolling stock yet. They haven't signed up a deal with any of the OEMs, the rail manufacturers, train manufacturers, and they haven't signed up with any of the infrastructure managers for track access paths. So they're no further ahead than Virgin or us. I mean, I think it's an interesting one because Trenitalia obviously is a state-run Italian railway, and Evelyn is effectively a private company. It's the Cosmans who are doing this on their own bat. It's not part of National Express or Mobico. This is a separate operation. So, I'm not surprised that the 2 have signed up. But again, this is only it's slightly premature to suggest that they maybe have got have stolen a march. I think our policy has always been to keep our commercial negotiations quite quiet. That's why we were the last people to the party, not because we weren't the first to start. We started at the same time as the others. It's just we always took an approach that we don't announce something until we have something quite significant to announce.
How do you finance something like this? I mean, some of the numbers that have been bandied around in various press releases, Virgin talking about raising 700 million, mixture of debt and equity, Italian, FS talking about any number you like, between about 500 and a billion I've seen. I mean, is this a private equity thing? Is it a market raising thing? How do you go about funding this? And what are you funding? Because I'd assumed you would lease the trains or something like that.
I mean, I think there's a number of ways of funding this, and we're certainly talking. We're in sort of fairly advanced negotiations with various parties, and we're pretty close to signing. I mean, I think in the broader brush approach, there's you could go to institutional finance houses, you could go to private equity, you could go to family offices, venture capitalists, or indeed you could have an industry partner, which is exactly what Evelyn has done. So there are different ways of funding this, and I don't. There's no shortage of interest around this. And what is quite interesting is traditionally this would not be seen as an infrastructure play, because this is a cash generative business without assets. Particularly, if you lease your rolling stock, you don't own the track, you don't own the trains. This is a cash positive business. But what we are seeing is, I think there is interest, a wider scope of interest from potentially people who would ordinarily have only touched fixed assets, infrastructure projects. I think that this is such a unique opportunity, and the figures are potentially so interesting that this is actually appealing to a wider, broader scope of investors than I potentially envisaged, or I envisaged, 2 years ago. So I think that's really interesting. I think investors can see this is one of the last sort of unreformed, sexy markets, London, Paris. This isn't opening up an open access service from, I don't know, Lille to Clermont-Ferrand or somewhere in the middle of France, or from London to Bradford. This is a premium route connecting two international cities with pent-up demand, where currently demand exceeds supply, and with huge forecast growth. And HS1 themselves, the Pancras High Speed, have had a report from Jim Steer from Steer suggesting that the market is going to grow from the current 11 million passengers to 35 million in the next 15 years. I mean, that's phenomenal growth.
That is phenomenal.
300 and something percent.
And Adrian, is that, you mentioned there London, Paris, Brussels, those are the primary markets. I mean, one of the, I suppose, disappointments for customers over the years has been that you can't go to Berlin, you can't go to Milan, you can't go to other major European cities. Is that possible as well, or is the focus really on that core London, Paris, Brussels market?
Well, you can't go yet. I think the focus initially is on that core London, Paris and Brussels market, because that's frankly where the lowest hanging fruit is, because you've got the infrastructure in place and you've got the border controls in place, and it's been stress tested already. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't other markets that we're looking at, and we think there's some quite interesting markets beyond. I mean, we've looked at Cologne as an easy win, if you like, because you can extend your Brussels service into Cologne, and if you think about the connecting traffic there, that is potentially quite interesting. However, you do have to balance longer distance trips against the business model. You're tying up rolling stock for much longer if you're going to go to, I don't know, Bordeaux or Geneva or Zurich or Frankfurt. And in that time, you possibly could have done 2 trips to Paris. So you do have to factor in, quite crudely, the cost of the seat if you're going to tie up your rolling stock for double the length of time. But that doesn't mean to say that there isn't a market. And I think there is a market, and we've looked at a number of markets and spoken to a number of potential stakeholders. Of course, one of the biggest issues is around the border controls, because, of course, wherever you go to, you've got to have British border controls at those stations. So, for argument's sake, if you come out of Geneva or Zurich or Bordeaux or Frankfurt, that means you've got to have a sterile international platform with potentially fencing around it and border controls. So that's not without its, challenges. It's not that easy to suddenly put these things in. But, there are options, as indeed there are in the UK. Everybody talks about Ashford. I think there's potentially a market for Ashford. Not yet, I hasten to add. But Ebbsfleet is very much on our radar. And in fact, we've publicly said that Ebbsfleet will be, we will stop every train there. We believe there's a big market at Ebbsfleet.
Every train at Ebbsfleet?
Every train at Ebbsfleet. There's 8 million people who live outside the M25, so in the southeast of England, a large car park and a good road network to connect to it. So we believe that there is a strong market at Ebbsfleet.
And enough that if Eurostar said, well, that's fine, you can stop at Ebbsfleet, we're not doing, so that gives them probably a 7-minute, 10-minute end-to-end journey time advantage. We'll just have the faster trains. Good luck, chaps.
I don't think people are going to make much. I think people are going to decide to go by train over flying. Whether it's 2 hours 5 minutes or 2 hours 11 minutes is going to make, frankly, very, very little difference.
And you don't have to worry about ORCATs either, so that's probably quite good. One of the things that St Pancras High Speed have said is that they're going to stimulate this market. They're going to reduce access charges, the cost of charges, certainly for 12 months, is it something like that? I mean, it sounds great, but 3 years, okay, right, sorry.
It's a sliding scale.
Okay. I suppose people would say, well, that's fantastic, but presumably when those subsidies, let's call them discounts, sorry. When the discounts expire, you'll just put the fares up. Or is that really just a way of helping build the business so that you don't have to do that?
I think there are parallels here with what regional airports have done for the likes of Ryanair, where there's an encouragement to develop a new route and to develop new businesses and to bring in new operators. So I think what St Pancras High Speed recognise, and indeed Getlink have also got a similar scheme, it's called the Etica discount, whereby if you can demonstrate that you're opening up a new route, or indeed in the case of St Pancras High Speed, starting a new service with new trains, there's an understanding that to help you, if you like, with your cash flow, there needs to be some form of incentive, because the costs on both St Pancras High Speed and particularly on Getlink, the track access charges are very, very high, extremely high. So, it is quite hard to make a business case unless you have some form of incentive. Having said that, we did make our business case. We built it based upon full track access charges. So this is a bonus, and I think a very encouraging bonus. And I think the answer is to your second part of your question, does that mean fares go up in 3 years? By the way, it's a sliding scale. It's 50%, then 40, then 30 on years 1, 2, and 3. No, because I think what will happen by then is your load factors will go up and that will offset it. So, you start a business, you don't expect to end up with 100% load factors on day one. You start low or reasonably low and you build it up over time.
And just on that question, in terms of service, what's the thinking? Is this going to be a full service offering, like I suppose, a plane where you've got your first class, your business class, your premium economy, or your steerage down the back, or are you looking at this as maybe as a low cost operation in order to really compete and have a total point difference? What's the vision around the service offering?
I think it's certainly not a one class. We're looking at two. I think three might be going too far, but we're certainly looking at a standard and a premium. But I think the point is it's about doing things better, as I mentioned right at the beginning. It's about putting yourself in the position of your passenger. What does the customer really want? What is good about what's currently being offered across the rail industry as a whole, and what is bad? Where can we think about little niche innovations, little tiny little points that might make it more comfortable for the passenger? Is it around the lighting? Is it around the seating? Is it around the way the tray table comes out? Is it around the catering offering? Is it around the boarding process? Is it around frequent traveller points? There are so many little things that can be added in that will encourage people to use the new operator. And incidentally, I'm sure Eurostar will then respond with their own innovation. And that's good, because what happens then is a rising tide lifts all ships and you'll get more people travelling by rail.
I mean, everybody who's not involved in the rail industry, but just sort of reads what they read in the mainstream media, would go, oh, fantastic. Where can I buy my ticket? I suppose the reality is, specifying and procuring and building and commissioning rolling stock takes time. So when realistically do you think people should start thinking, by this date, we'll have a competitor operating on through the Channel Tunnel between London and Paris?
I think we're looking at Q1, potentially Q2 of 2029. So you're talking 3 and a bit years away. It is possible you could go into the sort of final quarter of 28, but this is so dependent on the rolling stock manufacturers. The order books
is that the
are fairly
critical
full.
path item?
It is, absolutely. If the rolling stock, if the trains were sitting in a siding ready to go, then it would be a different matter. But bear in mind, you can't just pinch second-hand rolling stock. You need effectively new build, but it needs to be channel tunnel compliant. That restricts us to effectively four types of train. And all the main manufacturers have pretty full order books. So you're looking really at that kind of time. But I think that's probably it would be better if it was a year or two before. But bear in mind, we're going to have all the border shakedowns and over the next border control issues over the next year or two. Between you and me, I'm rather glad that we're not starting in December this year.
For so many years, it was kind of a little bit dormant and dull. And then all of a sudden, we have debates, discussions such as these, and whatever happens, I suppose as a punter, you can't really lose, can you? I suppose from a Gemini Trains point of view, you have a firm view about how you would like to see this pan out. But look, it's really interesting. Thank you for taking us through all that.
My pleasure.
Good luck to the next phase. It certainly isn't going to be dull, and we're watching it carefully. And maybe we'll hopefully have a chance to chat once you've got to sort of the next stage. But for now, Adrian, thank you so much, and all the best for the next phase of the plan.
Not at all. Thanks very much for having me.
Interesting to hear all that from Adrian, Richard, who's been around a year or two, and he's clearly putting that experience to good use in a bid which is not before time. I mean, I remember going to St Pancras to see the DBICE there, and when I looked up my pictures, I was horrified to see it was 2010, 15 years.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And that was presented as rolling the pitch for services to a range of European services. So what's your take?
Well, I exactly the same as yours. I mean, it's not before time. And I think it's one of those where not a lot has happened for a long time, and then all of a sudden, I think quite a lot is going to happen quite quickly.
The London bus principle.
Indeed. And some of that, I think, is very much down to the new leadership at St Pancras High Speed. At H1, they seem to be really cracking on with, as Adrian talked about, a new approach, perhaps come out of London City Airport, looking at sort of passenger flow management as a Pancras, increasing capacity, which has always been a big issue. Obviously, there's Temple Mills, and there's other stuff as well, but it just kind of feels it's going to gather some real momentum. And I think these guys at Gemini are very credible. It was good to hear what they're up to.
He did make sense, and he came. You only get one chance to make a first impression, don't you? And I thought he did well. Yeah. But you talk about preparations at St Pancras. I mean, that was 2007 they opened, wasn't it? November. I remember going to the opening ceremony, and they got quite a few real basics wrong in that station. I mean, at the most basic level, there weren't enough ladies' loos, and within weeks there were queues of angry ladies snaking out the loos there and down which they had to address really quick. So they're checking in things the same. You'd have thought they'd have given it maybe a bit more thought.
Yeah, perhaps. And obviously basic stuff is very frustrating when they get it wrong. But I mean, you kind of probably tell you, well, that was then, this is now. I think, though, what is interesting is that, there's clearly different views about what the most appropriate competitor service is to put on it. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And of course, I think we should say that all the other operators, Virgin and
are available.
Evelyn and their new MOU with Italian State Railways. If you would like to come onto Green Signals to put your views across, you're always most welcome to do so.
So we shall hopefully look forward to that, Richard.
That would be good.
Wouldn't it just? All human life is on green signals. Well, all railway life anyway.
Okay, I would move on without you.
Okay, from one exclusive interview to another. We're using that word exclusive a lot, Richard. Richard visited York recently and chatted with Matt Rice, Chief Operating Officer of Northern Trains. We published that interview on Tuesday, April 22nd, and Ian Yowett, the open access guru and godfather, currently MD of Grand Union Trains. But he also interviewed Henri Murison. You're getting plenty of interview experience, Richard. Great. Chief Exec of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Now, Henri's a regular guest and commentator on national news programmes, most recently talking about the emergency rescue of the British steel plant at Scunthorpe. There is arguably no one more plugged into what is going on in the north of England than Henri when it comes to politics and the practice of devolution, and just knowing what he's talking about regarding the railway as well. And as far as we're concerned, how that affects transport policy and delivery. We will publish the full interview with Henri on Tuesday, April 29th, and I promise you it's a really great listen from the balcony at the National Railway Museum as well, I think. But for now, here are two clips to whet your appetite in which Henri does not hold back. The first is when he and Richard discuss previous Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's decision to cancel HS2 Phase 2 to Manchester. And the second is when they discuss what a redesigned DFT might look like post the creation of GBR. This is really good stuff.
We had Hugh Merriman on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he said, bearing in mind he was Minister for Rail and HS2, and I asked him, were you consulted? And he said, I was informed, which was a no. He wasn't consulted. I just still find that absolutely unbelievable. I mean, just take us back, if you can, without it being too painful, to that October time. What was going on then, and how did we get to that decision? Because it it certainly damaged Northern Powerhouse Rail, didn't it?
It did. And I mean, as much as I say I'm not here to argue for new lines for their own sake, the outcomes require you to build new infrastructure, right? And that's what the HS2 issue is that we had a hybrid bill that was tootling through Parliament to build all of Phase 2B. That is the absolute bedrock of the Northern Powerhouse Rail network. And you only need to look at a year ago, almost now, when the government reran the numbers for the business case for the section of line between Piccadilly and the airport, to realise what it does to the business case when you take away a big chunk of the traffic that's going south and towards Birmingham. It makes it much harder to demonstrate the need for that new infrastructure. Despite the fact that those east-west benefits are still there, you're developing a market that doesn't already exist, and we know that from a business case perspective, the Treasury is very dubious about the benefits of that and ascribing economic value, as much as I would argue that they misunderstand the potential benefits. We are yet to change that dynamic in terms of how these things are appraised. Even politicians who have very limited aspirations around public transport understand the idea that in a local area, somebody needs to be in charge of transport. And if that is going to be the public sector, they need to have the right skills and expertise to do it properly. I think what we will see, however, is that in the new railway, if we're going to get rid of private companies running the services, which is now what's going to happen, for better or worse, we will see in the long term whether people like me who make a non-ideological argument are right, whether the government who make an ideological argument, whether they're right. But what is interesting to me is that the DFT have a lot of civil servants who work on the rail industry, who are responsible for managing these very complicated, contractually driven processes. And now we're going to get rid of those processes, right? So we don't need all those people. So I'm not just interested in how efficient are the bits of TOCs that have now become publicly managed and run, like TPE or Northern. I'm also interested in how many people are working in central government as civil servants managing this network, because particularly considering that they were so terrible at managing Network Rail in a silo and managing the operating companies in a different silo, and often would be accepting tenders from companies which presumed infrastructure which the government hadn't been funding and had no plan to fund. And there were lots of examples of that at Leeds Station and other places where assumptions were made built into contracts that just didn't exist, right? Because the DFT just hadn't joined the paperwork at their own end to understand the mismatch in expectations of what will be delivered and what was actually going to be built. And I think for me, the full benefits of rail nationalisation only come when, as I alluded to, you get down the cost of leasing trains and make longer term decisions, you reduce the number of civil servants at the DFT, and finally, you get genuine behaviour change and modal shift through integrated ticketing at the local level.
What do we think, Richard? Where are we going with some of these really big threads?
Do you know, the fascinating thing about Henri is he is just across so much stuff, right? And that comes out in the full interview. It's, you know, it's a good one to listen to. It really is. What I was surprised about was just how kind of direct he was, on both of those things. Not saying that's the wrong thing to do, by the way. I mean, absolutely the right thing to do, and I agreed with him on both those things. But it was quite sort of straightforward, really, which I think is really refreshing to hear from somebody who is in a position of significant influence. But there's some very interesting stuff. I mean, we talk in the interview about devolution and the challenges that come when you have local authorities, combined authorities, metro mayors, whatever they happen to be, and then national priorities. We talk in the context of rail about potential for a conflict, if you like, between local priorities and a national network. And actually, Henri's comments around that I think they might surprise people. They're very pragmatic, they're very sensible. But no, there's some really big stuff happening at the moment, Nigel, and Henri, in the context of the North, is across all of it, and it is really worth a listen.
Bushes are not being beaten about, are they?
No.
And he's not the first person we've come across doing that. And I think it's an indication just how serious the issues are, and people are just fed up of hearing mealy-mouthed stuff primarily from government and are just telling it as it is. And we're more than happy to hold a microphone in front of them to do that.
Indeed.
And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us, because we love you all. First of all, our usual thanks to RIA, the Railway Industry Association, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. Thanks, guys. Your support, as ever, is hugely appreciated. It really is. And then a big thank you to everyone who's left us a super thanks on YouTube this week. And you all are. Deep breath. Bob Walsh, Alan Kirkman, Andrew Seddon, Howard Jones, Mac User 200606, Walter Fillingham, Graham Whitley, Alistair Rutledge, Marion Bloom, Chris Exley, Peter Curtis, John Kirkman, Roddy Jenkins, Richard Price, and the Independent Brigline Rail Group. We absolutely appreciate so many of you leaving those super thanks so regularly, some of you as well. So thanks ever so much indeed. It really helps us to continue to head towards sustainability for green signals in the long term, which has got to be a good thing.
It certainly is.
Well, it is for us.
And thanks to all our members. We're very grateful for their continued support. If you're not sure what membership's all about, you can join either on YouTube, if that's your preferred platform, or on Patreon, which is for those who I think do tend to listen to the audio platforms.
That's right.
More. And membership gives you all sorts of goodies, such as early access. Early access is very important. So our members have already seen, for instance, the Ian Yoa interview and the Matt Rice one before they were published to more widely. We also do a thing after every show called Raw and Uncut, which is unscripted,
raw and uncut,
and usually chaotic. There's behind the scenes bits and bobs, and there's some other tangible stuff like our highly sought after members mug. So loads and loads of stuff. In fact, John Campbell, one of our members, has sent us a great photograph of his mug, which he says has been requisitioned by his wife because it's the perfect size for her morning coffee.
Obviously, a very discerning lady.
Indeed so. Now, as you've just been talking about there, Nigel, about super thanks, membership really helps us do more of what we do. And so if you do have a look at joining, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And we enjoy doing all the additional content for our members.
We absolutely do. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. So here we go. East Midlands Railway has unveiled the first revamped Class 170 to enter service. It's the first train in a £23 million programme to modernise the fleet of 44 trains. Brand new seats, tables and modern charging facilities, as well as all the things you'd expect, such as refurbished toilets and a new passenger information system, have been complete. The next completed train is scheduled to enter service next month, with a refurbished unit expected to follow each month thereafter. And that makes me feel very old because I remember them coming along as brand new trains.
I have to say, all these midlife refurbishments make me feel equally old. Actually, I quite like a midlife refurbishment myself. There you go. Because there's another. It is scary. Here's another fleet refresh here. Southeastern's partly refreshed Class 376 Electrostar. There's also entered passenger service. It's got rather nutty blue livery, energy efficient LED lighting. It's stage one of a multi-million-pound refurbishment programme. So the first completely refreshed train is expected to be ready by the end of the year. It's a midlife, there you go again, refresh for the 376s. And the overall fleet improvement programme they've got includes a £27 million refurb of the Javelins, the Class 395 Javelins. There's 29 of those, didn't realise that. Transfer of 13 of the Class 377s from Gavir Thameslink. Retrofitting toilets to 30 of the Class 707s. And of course, as Steve White's been on this programme talking about before, the procurement programme to replace the old networkers. So heck of a lot going on at Southeastern.
More feeling old. I remember seeing the Javelins unveiled in their new depot when Ruth Kelly was Transport Secretary, and she went down there to see that. I think I could do with a midlife refresh, Richard, and before you say it, I know it's too late.
No comment. I would move on if I were you.
Thanks to Steve Roberts now for sending us this one. Trials of Coventry's new very light rail system are set to begin in May. This new test phase will involve running a battery-powered light rail vehicle along a 220-metre line that was recently laid in the city centre. For the following month, the vehicle will operate on the test track while engineers collect technical data and public feedback. The VLR project has been funded by West Midlands Combined Authority and is expected to cost around 189 million. I think it's cheaper because they don't have to move all the services underneath, don't they?
I believe so. I think you can get an awful lot of electric buses for 189 million pounds.
Oh, you just can't help yourself, can you?
No, I can't. Sorry. Thanks to Pieter Muggeridge for putting us onto this one. Now, there was major rail disruption in the last few days, actually, in South Wales because of urgent repairs that had to be carried out to a bridge in the Cardiff central area. Now, the bridge is called Intersection Bridge, and it goes over the Great Western Main Line just to the east of Cardiff Central Station, and it's the bridge that takes stuff up to Queen Street and then up to the Valley lines. So it's a very busy bridge, right? And I actually remember it because it got quite tight clearance on it. And it was an issue when they were electrifying the railway because I think there's a massive great culvert or even river underneath it, right? So it's a quite complicated area. Anyway, the story was that the bridge had moved. So, and it turns out it's actually Transport for Wales Bridge, right? Because it was part of the transfer when the core Valley lines were devolved to TFW. So we asked Transport for Wales for a comment as to what was going on. And they said this. They said, during a regular visual inspection of Intersection Bridge near Cardiff Queen Street on April 19th, inspectors found part of the structure had moved beyond ordinary tolerances. The lines above and below were suspended from use as a safety precaution, so further analysis and a plan for remedial action could be put in place. Network Rail and Amy Infrastructure Wales are now working closely together to resolve the issue, and Transport for Wales and other operators are currently running a reduced train plan. Now, we understand from good sources that initially, obviously all the lines were closed whilst they worked out what to do. This bridge has been an issue for some time, and it's been almost like on a watch list for some time. And this inspection at the weekend was this isn't a new thing. They just realised after they did a detailed inspection that it had this movement.
It shows the system works, then, doesn't it?
It does show the system works. And as TFW said, they put in place an urgent action plan. Network Rail, working with Amy and TFW, we got the main lines underneath reopened by at the end of the Easter breaks. That's good news. But the bridge itself, as Transport for Wales are saying, is going to have some more design work done to work out what to do for the long term. So right now, the lines underneath are open. Good news. They're not running trains on it, which isn't quite as bad as it sounds because there's actually a lot of engineering work going on the Rumney line, and they can still run down, I believe, into the bay, and stuff that goes off to the other valley lines can run out via the city line, Radier and Ninian Park and that way. But they will have to find a fix for this. It's it almost couldn't be a more a more intensively used bridge in that location.
No.
So we'll keep an eye on this one.
Good. Oh, thanks for that, Richard. Just one closing point, diving back to your remark about electric buses. There is research, though, isn't there, that people will move out of the cars to get on a tram, but would not do so to get on a bus. So there's logic in going for the VLR scheme.
So you can't resist it either, can you? Right.
Well,
you've got a thing about buses. I don't understand why people have got a thing about buses. I like buses. Maybe it's just because it's in the family, But I don't know. I love buses.
I used to like.
I've not convinced you. I can tell.
Well, I was just thinking. I did always used to. Well, I still do. I still would actually. Always enjoyed sitting in the seats at the front of the top deck. That was always good fun, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, that was great fun
on a bus. Anyway.
Yeah.
And that's this, but no, I'm not a fan of buses. And that's this week's Railway News Roundup. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news, you can drop us an email at news@greensignals.org. We can't promise to read them all out, but the best ones we will. And if they're yours, we'll give you a name as well.
Certainly will. Which means it's now time to do the quiz.
Hey, here we go.
Now, last week's question was this.
Oh, yeah, it was a good one, this.
Well, yeah, but as ever, loads and loads of kind of, I think you might find, anyway, right. There are plenty of railway stations where there is no road access. But where could I visit a railway station that is so isolated it has no pedestrian access either? Now, quite a few people interpreted isolated, I think, as meaning remote. Wasn't necessarily wrong, right? So we had lots of people said Dovey Junction, Carreur, Burney Arms, that was very popular, and Newtondale on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. But there are paths to all of them.
I thought Dovey had foot access.
It does. I think it's a permissive road. It's owned by Network Rail, but you can still walk to Dovey Junction Station. I mean, quite why, I don't know, but you can. And I think it's the same with Carreur. There's a private road which you can walk down, and I think under Scotland's right to roam rules, you can do that. So I think the correct answer had to be a station that was an interchange-only station, a rail interchange-only station, which, of course, means it is isolated because you can't walk there. Right? And if that is the case, and I think it is, permitted answers that we did get a lot of people saying were the most popular was Smallbrook Junction on the Isle of Wight, which is you cannot get there unless you're changing trains there.
So you can just change from the Wight Railway to Steam Railway.
To the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, exactly. Yeah. Another really good answer was Manula Junction. I think I pronounced that correct, which is in County Mayo, footway transferring between the Foxford and Ballina branch trains onto the Dublin Westport line. So Manula Junction, yep, that's exactly the same. It's interchange only. One person came up with, I think, arguably the cleverest answer, Saglian's railway station in Switzerland, which is a connecting station, because I didn't say it had to be the UK, right? And that is exactly the same as Manula Junction, Smallbrook. It's only for changing trains. So we put them all into a hat, drew one out at random, and the winner was Jeremy Ricketts. So well done, Jeremy. If you send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org, we'll get your mug out to you. I'm a bit behind on sending mugs out. For those listening who think, where's my mug? I had to order some new packaging. It arrives today, so I will crack on with that. To this week's quiz, I'm feeling in a very sort of generous mood today, Nigel. So it's a really easy one. What do Werrington, Chipping Sodbury, and Brock all have in common?
I can guess, but I'm not going
Werrington,
to write it out.
Chipping Sodbury, and Brock all have in common. They're all railway locations, by the way. If you think you know, answers to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, April 26th. As usual, we'll put all the correct answers, expecting many for this one. We'll select a winner at random who will receive our highly prized Green Signal quiz winners mugs.
So your kitchen table will be very busy this afternoon with packing. And then maybe we ought to alert Devisers Post Office to brace themselves for the rush.
Yeah, no, there's not that many, but I think I've got about 10 members mugs to get out as well. So there you go. Yeah.
All right. Now, thanks to David Redgewell for sending us this final bit of good news. The Isle of Wight Steam Railway has acquired Ashey Station 57 years after it was sold by British Railways. The station was built 150 years ago for the opening of the Ryde and Newport Railway, but became an unmanned halt in 1953 and was eventually sold in 1968 when the line closed. The Isle of Wight Steam Railway reopened the line through Ashey in 1991, but trains simply passed by the original station buildings. Now, the railway has announced that it entered into private negotiations with the Holbrook family who own the station. The plan is to restore the platform, return the buildings to period condition, and eventually reinstate the passing loop and other features. The railway is now looking to raise money to help in the restoration project. And you've only to, well, I haven't been to the Isle of Wight, but you've only to look at the job they do on carriages, locomotives and everything else to know that that's going to be a beautiful period piece, don't you?
It will be absolutely lovely.
In due course.
I went through it recently, when we went to go and interview Steve Oates there, and Lucy and I, my daughter, we actually caught the train to Haven Street, and you go through Ashey. And I remember thinking, that would be lovely, because the running in board, I think, is still there. So it'll be lovely. Well done then.
And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week, apart from to wish you happy birthday, Richard, on behalf of Stef and myself. We won't ask how many rings there are on the tree. We'll spare you that.
Thank you.
But have a good day. Have a good day. So thanks so much to all you out there for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. There's a little subscribe button there to do that. And then there's a little bell to click if you want notifications of new stuff. And if you really want to support us, find out about membership on YouTube or Patreon to get all the goodies which Richard mentioned earlier. But most importantly, join us again next week for this show, which will always be free. So until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Have a great week till next time.